issued for it, and the first item on our agenda is the election of officers.
Yes, Mr. President, I would make a motion that we retain the same slate of officers that we had during the previous year.
And I second that motion. Call for question.
Any discussion? Renee, do you have any discussion?
Renee, can you hear us?
She might.
No. She can't hear. Yeah. Well, I'm going to go ahead and call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. And the next item we have on the agenda is the approval of minutes from our November 9th meeting. Michelle sent those out, and I have reviewed them, and I have no issues. Do you have any issues?
No, sir. Mr. President, I'll make a motion we approve the minutes of the November 9th meeting.
I second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. And now we get to the substance of things. The next item is authorization for an additional payment for disposal area 12A and B. A request to pay the Corps $1,803,000. And I'm going to call on Mr. Channing Hayden, the Director of Navigation for the Port, to talk about that.
Mr. President, members of the board, you've got several handouts under your agenda. The first one relates to this. A little background on this. We asked the Corps, as we can do under the project partnership agreement, the non-federal sponsor, which is Lake Charles Harbor Criminal District, can ask the Corps to do certain things on its behalf. Thank you. One of the things that we can ask it to do is to go out and obtain easements that may be needed, because the non-federal sponsor is required to provide all the real estate necessary for disposal sites. A number of years ago, the Corps was in possession of all the easements. Because of changes in procedures on how the Corps did things, being as the non-federal sponsor had to provide the real estate, they transferred all their records to us. Based on the records we asked them to go get permanent easements on certain portions of disposal areas 12A and B. They did their research. They came up with an appraisal, which was $2.5 million. And we said, okay, go talk to the landowner. They talked to the landowner, and the landowner said, no, you need more property than what our records, which were the Corps' records, show. And they produced documentation. The landowner produced documentation to justify their claim. The Corps evaluated that documentation, agreed with it, went out and had this much larger parcel of land appraised, and came back with a $9 million plus appraisal. Because of the Corps' procedures, when you get to that amount of money, they had to go up to Washington, have it reviewed, got to the Justice Department. It got tweaked in Washington to where it's now $10 million and change. We have already paid the Corps the $9 million and change. We're asking the funding board to authorize this additional payment of $1,803,000 so that the Corps can then go to the owner and be fully in funds to make that offer to the owner to acquire the disposal easements on these properties. And that's what our request is today for that authorization.
I get a motion?
Mr. President, I make a motion authorizing the funding board to make an additional payment for DA 12A and B to the Army Corps of Engineers.
I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes. The next item is authorization for the Lake Charles Harbor and Terminal District to proceed acquiring additional disposal easements in disposal areas 8, 9, and 13. And once again, call on Mr. Hayden.
I think I gave you the wrong order of the attachments. Well, no, I didn't. The core, the second attachment I gave you, if you look at the second page, it gives a list of the disposal sites and the Corps' plan for rebuilding those sites. That's all right, we missed you, Charlie. So this is that 20-year plan for rebuilding the sites. That's what the DMMP is all about. It's rebuilding the disposal sites to create more capacity. We've already started working on this plan. CDF-D has rocks both on the channel side and the lake side. The next step, when more funds become available, is to push material out to the rocks on both sides and then rebuild the levees, and we'll have a disposal site. And this is the order in which they plan to do it. I sent that plan to Regan Brown, asked Regan to tell us which sites needed to have permanent easements obtained, and that's the first page, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's not in the order in which the Corps gave it to us, but this is the order in which they appear on the channel. Can we have a full channel map so we can show everybody what we're talking about?
We're working on that.
Okay. So no, we can't.
Yeah, we're having a problem with that.
Well, we tried to get some maps to show you where all of these sites are located, but we're having technical difficulties.
We could pull them up on the televisions, even though it's not going to be on the first screen.
Oh, okay. All right.
There you go. It's coming on right now, Donald.
Click share's not the backside.
You'll notice that the public notice talks about 8, 9, and 13. And 13 does not appear on the list of disposal sites where we need to acquire a permanent easement. I'll tell you about that. That's a special case. I'll explain that in a minute. So we had the list that we needed the easements, the permanent disposal easements on. We wrote to the Corps of Engineers, which is the second attachment in the pack, or actually the third attachment in your packet, and asked them if they would please begin to work on DAs 8, 10, and 13. They came back to us and said no. They would continue working on 12A and 12B, but in the meantime, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act had been passed, and they had been given a lot of work to do by Congress, and they did not feel that they would be able to handle this work because they had to staff up to do other stuff. They asked if we would undertake, Lake Charles Harbor and Terminal District, would undertake acquiring these easements as we are required to do as non-federal sponsors. So what we are here today to do is to give the funding board an update on what we're doing. We're not asking for any money right now, but we want you to know that instead of coming to you in the future and asking you to authorize a check to be paid to the Corps of Engineers, we will be going out hiring appraisers, surveyors, that sort of thing, trying to do the work that the Corps is now doing for us. And so when we come back to you, we'll have an invoice from Acme Screen Door and Surveying Company saying that we owe them so many dollars for going out and doing a survey of such and such a property. We can't write any checks from this account without your authorization. So we will have invoices, and we'll have to go through as a state agency, whatever the state requirements are for engaging people to perform these services. Once we get everything together and we get an appraisal, then we'll have to come back to you and say, okay, the property is worth this much based on the appraisal. Can we go have an authorization to go talk to the landowner about this, and you'll say yay and nay, and we'll move it forward. So this is in lieu of us coming to you 3-4 months from now and say, oh, can you give Acme Screen Door and Surveying Company a check? And everybody says, what? So this is the heads up for what we plan to do.
So Channing, just for clarification purposes, on the appraisals or, the surveying costs, the surveying costs would be relatively cheap. In the proposal, are you saying that the port would advance fund the cost of the surveys, but once the appraisal's developed, the full appraisal would not be advance funded by the port, but would be coming back to the board, this board, for payment if we were to pursue that acquisition?
If we made an offer to the landowner based on what the appraised amount is, and we negotiated and came to a deal that's, reasonable, we would come back to this board and ask for authorization to give Sam and Sally's real estate company a check for whatever amount we had agreed to.
But the smaller surveying invoices, the port would pay as incurred and then come back to this board to request reimbursement? Is that?
If that's what my boss at the Lake Charles Harbor and Terminal District wants to do, yes, sir, that's what we'll do.
John?
I think that would be the most practical way to approach it.
I agree.
To avoid having to come to the funding board every time we need to hire an appraiser, get a
especially since we're just meeting quarterly, so.
And we discussed this with the advisory committee, if the board would like to say, you know, up to a certain amount for these preliminary costs, costs other than the actual price of the
Right.
property, that's fine. Or we could do that, you know, we could come, once we have some of those costs or some estimates of those costs, come back maybe at the next meeting and present the board with a request for reimbursement. I would like to begin the process, because I think it's gonna be a long process. I'd like to begin the process as soon as we can, get some of these preliminary, you know, steps out of the way. But however you guys wanna do it, it's fine.
I mean, from a port perspective, I'm comfortable paying for those invoices as they're incurred, the smaller surveying, things like that, the appraisal. I don't have a problem from the port's perspective paying those. Obviously, once the appraisal's submitted, I would want full authority, I want this board to approve that invoice, and I would not want the port to pay for that in advance.
That makes sense.
Okay.
The map that we put up shows you 8 is right across from Citgo, 9 is a little bit downriver, so is 10. We're gonna, the public notice is incorrect, we're doing 8 and 10, not 8, 9, and 10. And then if you could pull the map up and show 13. All right, there's 13. That is Shoepick Island. And Shoepick Island is sort of a special case that I told you I'd come back to and explain to you. So can we get the map, that other map of Shoepick Island up there, please? The other one. Thank you. That sliver of Shoepick Island on the east side, which would be the right as you're looking toward it, was a withdrawable piece of the easement. A number of years ago, we started to discuss with the landowner acquiring that because it was withdrawable, and the landowner said, okay, yeah, I'll sell it to you, but I want you to buy this whole bunch of land I own someplace else. And the short story is that the port, as a public agency, cannot buy things that it doesn't need, and we didn't need this other land. So we couldn't convince them that that was the case, and discussions fell through. The last document you have in your packet is a letter from the Corps saying, we would really like to have full use of 13, and there's a little 3-acre piece on 15. So essentially, what the Corps did when the landowner withdrew that piece on the right, the Corps built a dike and diked off that area so that there wouldn't be any spillage onto the landowner's property and continue using 13. What we're intending to do is to go back to the owner and say, we'd like to buy the strip on the east side of the island. And if the owner says, well, I'm not gonna sell it to you unless you buy all this other stuff, we're gonna, why 13 is being addressed, even though it's not on the list of properties that have withdrawable easements, because it did, and the easement was withdrawn.
So Channing, am I correct that it's 8, 10, 13, and 15, or just 8, 10, and 13?
We're just gonna do 8, 10, and 13 right now.
Okay.
And the reason we would have to do the expropriation, the Corps has an expropriation process, correct?
They do.
And I'm told it's more efficient than ours, but in this situation, because they've sort of punted to us, we have to do it.
That is correct.
Renee,
And I should have mentioned
oh, I'm sorry.
earlier that both of these items went to the advisory committee earlier today. They were discussed, and the advisory committee supports the requests.
Charlie?
Just had a quick question. I apologize, it's hard for me to hear. But what we're talking about here is the beginning of an expropriation of land process, right?
No, not as
I mean, that's the end result.
that's, it could be. It could be a negotiated agreement.
I mean, if they refuse to sell,
If
then
they-
it's gonna.
but they
this
haven't-
is the process on which to
Yeah.
expropriate.
Right.
And what Mr. Hayes is saying is there'll be costs incurred on the way to get to that, because like you say, the surveys and investigations, you'll approve that incrementally, hoping to settle with the landowner.
Right.
But if it doesn't come to fruition, then it would continue on to expropriation. Okay, just making sure I understand.
And you're correct, and I would just, I'll put a footnote to that says if we don't have these disposal sites, we can't dredge the channel. And if we can't dredge the channel, we can't bring ships in.
Right.
So that's what this is all about. Well, yeah, but I want the record to be clear, Charlie.
Yes, sir. I appreciate your help and patience.
You're welcome. Do we
Renee,
need-
oh, go ahead, Charlie.
Do we need to take some type of action, or is this just a heads up?
I just think it's just a heads up to me. If the board wants to, you can pass a motion that says we'll proceed as described, and you'll be done.
Okay, well, I move we proceed as described.
Renee, I wanted to get your thoughts. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on potentially taking this next action.
I mean, I'm not opposed to it, but of course, I wanted to say for the record, I'm abstaining from voting. Since I'm not there in person, I should have made that clear at the start.
Yeah, and what's going on is this, there are rules within the state of Louisiana that preclude Renee, if she's not here in person, from voting on these actions. Am I correct, John? So she can participate in the discussion of the agenda items, but she cannot vote on those items. But I do want to get your input if there's anything more that you wanted to add to the discussion before we do vote.
And if you have any questions for me, please ask them.
I'm good for now, thank you all.
Okay. On that case, I'll make a motion that we authorize the Lake Charles Harbor Terminal District to proceed acquiring additional disposal easements for DAs 8, 10, and 13.
8, 9, and 13. Oh, no, 8, 10, and 13, you're right.
I second it. All in
Before I
favor?
change my mind, second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. That brings us to item 5 on the agenda, is just any other matters that could come before the board. I guess my question for the audience is, does anybody have any comments or questions? Blade?
Yeah, just for your information for the board itself. Oh, thank you. For the board itself, in 2018, the legislature created, as you all know, Charlie has served on that board, the Calcasieu Cameron Navigation District. It, for all practical purposes, since this board and the advisory board were created after that, it has not functioned. But we continue to get letters from the Division of Administration, from Ethics, and from the legislative auditor as to why we haven't done our annual reporting. So therefore, I've asked Senator Abraham to file legislation in this coming legislative session to terminate the Lake Charles, I mean, not the Calcasieu Cameron Navigation District. And he's agreed to do that. Because it's a local bill, you have to do local advertising. So it has been advertised in the Lake Charles American Press and in the Cameron Pilot. So if you get calls or some of your industry folks say, wait a minute, you're terminating this board that we just created. That's not the board that we're terminating. It's the Calcasieu Cameron Navigation District that's going to be terminated and will be removed from the books, and in the future, no one will have any questions about conflicts between that board and this board. It will be terminated.
Thank you.
And one other thing I did, Captain Palmer instructed me to talk to Jay Darden, Commissioner of Administration, and to be sure that the $5 million for this board from the state was in the governor's budget. It is. I've been assured by Mr. Darden, and I think Jonathan and I have conversed about that. It is in it. The only other thing I would add to that, and we talked about that in the advisory board, is next year will be the last year that this current administration and this current legislature will be seated. So you'll have a new administration and a new legislature in the final year of the $5 million that has been promised to us by the state. I think we all need to be aware of that and look at something down the road with a new governor or those who are running for governor, some commitment from them for that $5 million when they become.
Yeah, I
Just
agree.
a heads up. Thank you.
You're welcome. Does anybody else have anything which they would like to bring before the board? If not, I move we adjourn the meeting.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
That second? Aye. All in
Aye.
favor? Aye. We're adjourned.
Thank you, Renee.
Thank you.